Watch. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign is now calling for presidential debates to take place, quote, much earlier than initially proposed by the Debate Commission, and more often. Here's what former President Trump and President Biden have said about the potential for an upcoming debate. Watch.
It's time for Crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the United States, and I to debate. We have to talk about what he's doing and where we're going. We owe it to our country. We owe it to all Americans. Anytime, anywhere, anyplace.
Mr. President, Donald Trump is ready to debate you right now. Do you accept?
Will you debate him?
If I were him, I'd want to debate me, too.
A Fox News poll finds 64% of voters think it is extremely important or very important to debate. Just 35% said it's not at all important. More news from the Fox poll. 72% of voters also said it shows weakness if a presidential candidate skips a debate. Kellyanne Conway, your reaction.
Those are great questions from the Fox News pollsters, because the big watchword in the 2024 election, Maria, is strength. And the opposite of strength is weakness, and the opposite of strength is failure. And now it has traveled onto the debate stage. Why? The democracy of information that President Trump led in his White House, tweeting out, under wing, Air Force One, Marine One, in the press briefing room, having the press come into the Oval Office consistently. That democratization of information continues on the presidential debate stage. Why? Because we can all access the two people who want to be commander-in-chief and president of the United States free of charge instantly. It is the most democratizing effect. The Trump campaign did something super smart yesterday. They're basically saying, look, the new normal post-COVID is that millions and millions of people are going to vote before the first debate and in between the first debate and the second debate. That happened in 2020, and then, of course, President Trump got COVID. The second debate became the third debate. The second one was canceled. And it happened in 2022, where John Fetterman had banked about 700,000 votes before the debate with Oz, the one and only debate they had. And the number one Google search after that debate was, how do I change my vote? Hello? You think the Oz voters were asking? So we definitely need more debates, not fewer. I don't know what Joe Biden is talking about when he says, if I were Donald Trump, I wanted to debate me too. If Biden is that proud of Bidenomics, if inflation is truly transitory and under control, if the border is secure, hello, then he should be able to stand up there and speak about it and defend it. Also, there's no evidence anywhere that Joe Biden can stand for 90 seconds anywhere. So that's a big question. That's a threshold question for his campaign. Look, in these debates, you're not under oath, but I think Joe Biden will be under fire for lying to the American people in the previous presidential debate that he had no contact with his son and his son's colleagues about those business dealings. We know that's not true. Thank you, Jamie Comer.
Yeah, that's true. Guy, I spoke with President Trump this year in January. We sat for an hour and a half. I don't know. I just don't think Joe Biden can sit for an hour and a half in an interview.
Or stand for an hour and a half, which was Kellyanne's point. Look, that's a weird answer from Biden. If I were him meeting Trump, I would want to debate me too. That seems like a self-own. I'm not sure if he realized that. It's like, yeah, if I were my opponent, I would want to debate me because I'm so weak, I'm so incoherent, I'm so old, my team doesn't want to debate. But of course, he'd want to debate me, right? That's kind of the real point. Maybe a bit of a slip there from the current president about the former president. I would be very surprised. Could be wrong. I would like to be wrong. I would be very surprised if we see 3, maybe not even 2, presidential debates this cycle. I think we'll see 1 or 0. That's my guess. I think the Biden team wants to minimize the chances for a big mess up on a national stage. And I think as long as the polls are close and they're not feeling really behind, I think they're probably going to stick with that. And what they're going to say is, we're not going to give a platform, and we're not going to sort of dignify an insurrectionist. Oh, and by the way, he refused to debate in the primary as well. That's, I think, the claim that they're going to make to justify the decision that they're probably leaning toward, because it's telling that they won't commit to this.
Yeah, President Trump is going to be with Speaker Mike Johnson today talking about election integrity issues, Kellyanne. And this is what certainly Trump supporters want to know, that the RNC and the former president are ensuring that we do have a transparent election this time.
Yes, and unfortunately, the only thing that we as a nation still do from COVID times is the way we vote. I don't see masks on anyone. I'm sure you're flying around on planes. The kids are in school, not around our kitchen islands. How in the world we're still voting the way we did during COVID? But we are. So you have to adapt or die politically. I think it's important that people feel that their vote counts. Easier to vote, harder to cheat. But also, I think we got to get people to vote early. I don't like it. I think voting early means 6:30 a.m. on November 5th. But if this is the new normal, I'd love to see President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump go and vote early for him in Florida when early voting starts. Because if he does that, millions of people will follow.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if you're going to do early voting, then you have to do early debates. I mean, is September is going to be the first debate?
No, let's do it now. And by the way, if Joe Biden refuses to debate Guy and Maria, you're going to see more of Trump that you just saw on that video. He's just going to put out more videos. Sleepy Joe's afraid to debate me. He probably can't stand there. He's going to look like a guy filled with energy and vim and vigor and stamina. And he's going to debate Joe Biden through these videos. So if I were Biden, I would accept the challenge.